Go to Ancestry.com right now. Search for a black ancestor born between 1840 and 1865. Find them in the 1880 census, a woman named Mary, a man named George, your great-great-grandmother who you know existed because she is your great-great-grandmother. Find them. Write down their name, their age, the county they lived in. Now, search for that same person in 1870. For thousands of American families doing this search, the person is not there. Not damaged records, not a different spelling, not a different county. Not there. The 1870 census, the first census conducted after emancipation, the first time in American history that black Americans were enumerated as citizens with names rather than counted as property in a slaveholder's inventory, does not contain their ancestor. I want to tell you why. Because the answer is in the National Archives, and it has been there since 1882. The year 1870 should have been the most important census in American history for black Americans. The 14th Amendment had been ratified in 1868, establishing birthright citizenship. The 15th Amendment was ratified in 1870, establishing the right to vote. For the first time, the federal government was constitutionally obligated to count black Americans as full citizens, not as 3/5 of a person, not as property, but as people with names and ages and occupations and family relationships. The Census Bureau understood the significance. Its 1870 instructions to enumerators were explicit. Every person in every household was to be recorded by name. There were no exceptions. The law was clear. The obligation was clear. What happened in the South between June and August 1870, when the census was actually conducted, is in the records of the Census Bureau at the National Archives under Record Group 29. It is also in the 1880 Census Bureau's internal review of the 1870 enumeration, which compared the 1870 results to the 1880 results and found a discrepancy that the Bureau's own statisticians could not explain by normal population growth. The 1870 census enumerators in the former Confederate states were appointed through the federal marshal system. Each federal judicial district had a marshal, and each marshal appointed the enumerators who would conduct the count in his district. In the years immediately following the Civil War, the federal marshal positions in the South were a contested political battleground. Some marshals were Reconstruction-era appointees who supported the project of counting the freed population fully and accurately. Others were local men with local political relationships that made systematic counting of black households a complicated proposition. The enumerators themselves, the men who walked from house to house with their ledger books, were drawn from the local population. In much of the rural South in 1870, the local population included men who had served in the Confederate Army, who had owned slaves, who lived on or near the plantations where freed people were working as sharecroppers or tenant farmers, and who had strong personal and economic relationships with the white landowners who employed those freed people. An enumerator who visited a plantation and recorded only the white family in the main house, leaving the cabins behind the house unvisited, was not easily caught. There was no oversight mechanism that would flag the omission in real time. There was a mechanism that would flag it 10 years later. The 1880 census was conducted under different political conditions. Reconstruction had ended in 1877, but the Census Bureau's commitment to accurate enumeration had, if anything, increased. The 1880 census used more enumerators, paid them more carefully, and implemented quality control procedures that the 1870 census had not had. When the 1880 results came in, the Bureau's statisticians compared the black population counts in southern counties to the 1870 counts for the same counties. They were looking for demographic anomalies, counties where the growth rates were implausibly high or low, which would suggest enumeration errors in one of the two counts. They found them. In county after county across 8 southern states, Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Louisiana, and Arkansas, the black population showed growth rates between 1870 and 1880 that were statistically inconsistent with normal population change. The growth was too fast, not because the population was actually growing that rapidly, but because the 1870 count had been too low. The Census Bureau's internal report documenting this finding is in the National Archives under Record Group 29. It names the specific states, it names specific counties, it estimates the magnitude of the undercount. The report was written in 1882. It was filed internally. It was not published as a public document. The American public, and specifically the Black American families who had been undercounted, was not told that the first census that was supposed to count them as citizens had systematically missed tens of thousands of them. I want to tell you about a woman named Eliza Washington, because she makes the abstract pattern specific. Eliza Washington was born in Macon County, Alabama, in approximately 1847. She would have been 23 years old in 1870. She lived in a cabin on a former plantation with her husband James and their 2 children. She is in the 1880 census. The Macon County enumeration for 1880 records her name, her age, her husband's name, her children, and her occupation as keeping house. She is not in the 1870 census. Macon County is one of the counties that the Census Bureau's 1882 internal report identifies as having an anomalously low 1870 Black population count relative to the 1880 figure. Eliza Washington should have been counted in 1870. The law required it. The enumerator in her district did not count her. The gap in the census record where her name should appear has been there since 1870. The report that documents why the gap exists has been in the National Archives since 1882. If you have an ancestor named Eliza Washington in Macon County, Alabama, this is your story. If you have any ancestor who appears in 1880 but not in 1870 in the Deep South, this is probably your story. The records that can help you find the person who was missing from 1870 are at FamilySearch.org. The Freedmen's Bureau Project has digitized millions of records from the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands, the federal agency that operated from 1865 to 1872, and that kept records of the freed population that the 1870 census was supposed to count. Your ancestor may be in those records. They are free to search. In 1882, a Census Bureau statistician named Francis Walker wrote a report that was never meant to be read outside the Bureau. Walker had been the superintendent of the census for both the 1870 and 1880 enumerations. He was a careful man, a former general in the Union Army, someone who understood both the political significance of the census and its technical requirements. He had supervised the 1870 enumeration and had been aware, even as it was being conducted, that the Southern results looked anomalous. By 1882, with the 1880 results in hand, the anomaly was undeniable. The 1882 report, which is in the National Archives under Record Group 29, is written in the careful language of a statistician who is documenting something that is both technically clear and politically uncomfortable. Walker does not use words like fraud or intentional omission. He uses the language of statistical analysis, under-enumeration, coverage deficiency, population discrepancy. But the numbers in the report are specific, and they tell the story that the language is careful not to tell directly. In Macon County, Alabama, Eliza Washington's county, the Black population in 1870 was recorded as 11,287. In 1880, it was recorded as 17,492. That is a 10-year increase of 55%. The natural increase of a population in 10 years, births minus deaths, runs at roughly 20 to 25% for a healthy population in that era. The difference between 55% and 25% represents approximately 3,500 people who were present in Macon County in 1870, but not counted. 3,500 people in one county. Eliza Washington was one of them. Walker's report goes through county after county across 8 states with the same arithmetic. Some counties show discrepancies smaller than Macon County. Some show larger. The aggregate across all the counties with anomalous growth rates in the 8 identified states is in the tens of thousands. The report was filed. It was not published. The Census Bureau's public reports on the 1870 census did not acknowledge the undercount. The official historical record showed the 1870 count as the authoritative enumeration of the American population, including the black population of the South. Families looking for their ancestors in 1870 for the next 100 years found nothing and assumed the records had been lost, or that their family had moved, or that something had happened that erased the trail. The Census Bureau's own documentation of why the trail was erased was in the National Archives. It was not indexed in a way that made it easy to find. I want to tell you about what the Freedmen's Bureau records show, because the Freedmen's Bureau records are the parallel archive that makes the 1870 gap visible from the other direction. The Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands operated from 1865 to 1872. It maintained records of the freed population across the former Confederate states, labor contracts, marriage registers, ration rolls, hospital records, land transactions, correspondence. These records are in the National Archives under Record Group 105. They have been partially digitized by a collaborative project that made them searchable on FamilySearch.org, where they are available free of charge. If your ancestor was in the South between 1865 and 1872, which they would have been if they appear in the 1880 census in a southern state, there is a reasonable probability that they appear in the Freedmen's Bureau records. The Bureau's labor contracts record names, ages, and locations. The marriage registers record the names of couples who formalized relationships that had been legally unrecognized under slavery. The ration rolls record the names of families receiving Bureau assistance. These records document the existence of people who were then omitted from the 1870 census. They are the before and the after of the gap. The Freedmen's Bureau recorded them in 1866 and 1867 and 1868. The 1870 census did not record them. The 1880 census found them again. The gap is not a mystery. It is a documented failure of the 1870 enumeration. The 1880 internal report that documents the failure is in Record Group 29. The Freedmen's Bureau records that document the people who were missed are in Record Group 105 and on FamilySearch.org. Ancestry.com holds the digitized census images for both 1870 and 1880. 3 archives, 1 gap. The gap is in the genealogical records of thousands of American families. Now, I want to tell you about the enumerator, because the enumerator is where the abstract institutional failure becomes a specific human decision. The 1870 census enumerator for the district that included Eliza Washington's portion of Macon County, Alabama, was a man whose name is in the enumerator records at the National Archives. His name, his appointment by the federal marshal, and his district assignment are documented. He enumerated the white households in his district. They are in the 1870 census record. He enumerated some of the black households, not 0, but not all. The ones he missed are identifiable because they appear in the Freedmen's Bureau records from 1866 and 1868 and then reappear in the 1880 census. They are the names in the gap. Did he skip them deliberately? Did he run out of time? Did the white landowners in his district discourage him from visiting the cabins behind their houses? The record does not say. Walker's 1882 report does not speculate about intent. It documents outcome. The outcome is that tens of thousands of black Americans, people who had survived slavery, who had survived the Civil War, who were legally citizens of the United States in 1870, were not counted as citizens in the first census that was supposed to count them. The Census Bureau knew by 1882. The report is in the National Archives. It has been there since 1882. If you find your ancestor in 1880 but not in 1870, go to FamilySearch.org. Search the Freedmen's Bureau records. Your ancestor may be there, in a labor contract from 1866, in a marriage register from 1867, in a ration roll from 1868. The person the 1870 census said did not exist. Recorded 3 years earlier by the federal government that would fail to count them in 1870. The gap in your family tree is not an accident. It is in a report at the National Archives. It has been there since 1882. The government documented its own failure and did not tell you. The documents were always there. The Census Bureau records documenting the 1870 undercount are in the National Archives under Record Group 29. The 1882 Internal Review, comparing 1870 and 1880 results in 8 southern states, is in the statistical correspondence files of that record group. The finding aid is available through archives.gov. The Freedmen's Bureau records, the parallel archive that documents the people missed in 1870, are in the National Archives under Record Group 105. Millions of these records have been digitized and are searchable for free at FamilySearch.org. Search Freedmen's Bureau on FamilySearch to access the records. The 1870 and 1880 census images are available on Ancestry.com. If you find an ancestor in 1880 in a Deep South county who does not appear in 1870, compare their county to the counties identified in the 1882 Internal Review. The gap may be explained. Your ancestor was counted by the Freedmen's Bureau. They were missed in 1870. They were found again in 1880. The report that explains why has been in the National Archives since 1882. Subscribe, because next week we open another file.